Alright everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight, we're diving deep into a story that's going to grab you by the throat and refuse to let go. Imagine watching your world crumble before your very eyes. Imagine the deafening silence that follows the shattering of everything you thought you knew. Imagine the weight of grief, the burning rage, the gnawing emptiness, all colliding in one single, devastating moment. What would you do? How would you survive? Could you ever truly heal? Could you ever rise above it all? Tonight's story, he watched his father get punched to death. Now he's the undisputed champion. Is a raw, unflinching look at a life forged in the crucible of tragedy. It's a tale of action, suspense, and a twist you won't see coming. But more than that, it's a story about resilience, about the enduring power of the human spirit, and about finding light in the darkest of places. But before we begin, I want to take a quick moment to ask that if you're enjoying the content, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Your support means the world to me and helps me bring more incredible stories like this to you. And speaking of support, I want to give a huge shout out to one of our amazing viewers, Emily Carter, 24, from Austin, Texas, ***. Emily, thank you so much for your continued encouragement and for being such a dedicated member of our community. Your comments always brighten my day. Okay, everyone, let's get started. Prepare yourselves because this is going to be a ride. This is the story of how a boy, broken by violence, became a champion. He watched his father get punched to death. Now he's the undisputed champion. The humid Louisiana air hung heavy, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and simmering resentment. 10-year-old Mikey clutched his father's calloused hand, the rough skin a comforting anchor in the swirling chaos of the backwoods bar. The Gator's Mouth, they called it, a dimly lit haven for hard drinkers and harder luck stories. Tonight, the air crackled with more than just the promise of a storm. It vibrated with a palpable tension Mikey couldn't quite understand, but felt deep in his gut. His father, Big Joe, a man built like an oak and possessing a heart to match, at least that's what Mikey believed, was nursing a beer, his gaze fixed on a man across the room. The man, a wiry figure with snake tattoos snaking up his arms, returned the stare with a sneer that could curdle milk. This was Rex the Rattler Calhoun, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and grudging respect in these parts. He was a local legend in the underground fighting circuit, a brutal competitor known for his lightning-fast strikes and a complete disregard for the rules. Mikey knew his dad wasn't a fighter. Big Joe worked at the docks, hauling cargo under the scorching sun, his strength earned through honest labor. But Mikey also knew the steel in his father's eyes, the quiet determination that burned beneath the surface. He'd seen it when Big Joe rescued a stray dog from the floodwaters, and he'd seen it when he stood up to the school bully who was picking on Mikey. The tension escalated. Words, slurred and venomous, began to fly. Accusations of unpaid debts, old grudges, and disrespect were hurled across the room like grenades. Mikey tugged at his father's hand, a silent plea to leave, to escape the brewing storm. Big Joe squeezed his hand in return, a reassuring gesture, but his eyes remained locked on Calhoun. Then it happened. A shove, a shouted obscenity, and the room erupted. Chairs crashed, glasses shattered, and the air filled with the sounds of grunts and curses. Mikey found himself pushed back against a wall, the scene unfolding before him in a horrifying slow motion. He saw his father, usually so calm and collected, explode into action. Big Joe's fists, normally used to lift heavy crates, became weapons, delivering powerful blows that sent bodies sprawling. But Calhoun was different. He moved with a speed and agility that Big Joe couldn't match. He dodged, weaved, and countered with a flurry of strikes, each one landing with sickening precision. Mikey watched, paralyzed with fear, as his father, his hero, was slowly being dismantled. Then came the blow. A right hook, delivered with the force of a sledgehammer, landed squarely on Big Joe's jaw. Mikey saw his father's eyes glaze over, his body crumpling to the floor like a felled tree. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sounds of the brawl faded into a dull roar. All Mikey could see was his father, lying motionless on the dirty floor, Calhoun standing over him, a cruel smirk twisting his lips. Someone screamed. Probably Mikey. Everything after that was a blur. The sirens, the flashing lights, the paramedics frantically working on his father. The cold, sterile environment of the hospital waiting room. The unbearable silence punctuated by the hushed whispers of the doctors. And then, the words that shattered Mikey's world. We did everything we could. Big Joe was gone. In that moment, something inside Mikey broke. The innocent joy, the carefree laughter, the unwavering faith in the goodness of the world. All of it vanished, replaced by a cold, hard knot of grief and a burning ember of rage. He watched as his father was taken away, a shell of the man he knew. The undisputed champion of Mikey's world had been defeated, not in a fair fight, but in a brutal, senseless act of violence. The world told him to grieve, to move on, to find peace. But Mikey couldn't. He couldn't forget the image of his father lying helpless on the floor, the triumphant smirk on Calhoun's face. He couldn't escape the feeling of utter helplessness, the burning injustice of it all. He knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within his soul, that he couldn't let it go. He wouldn't let Calhoun get away with this. The anger became a fuel, a driving force that consumed him. It was a dark and dangerous path, but Mikey saw no other way. He would train, he would learn, he would become stronger. He would become the champion his father never had the chance to be. He would make Calhoun pay. He would avenge his father's death. The journey would be long and arduous, filled with pain and sacrifice. But Mikey was ready. He had nothing left to lose. He had a promise to keep, and he had a score to settle. The boy who watched his father die was gone. In his place stood a young man, hardened by grief, fueled by rage, and driven by a single unwavering purpose: to become the undisputed champion and deliver justice to the man who took everything from him. The world didn't know it yet, but Rex the Rattler Calhoun had just made a very powerful enemy. And that enemy was coming for him. The orphanage felt like a prison, cold, sterile, and devoid of warmth. It was a stark contrast to the boisterous, loving home Mikey had known with his father. The other kids, mostly hardened by their own experiences, kept their distance. Mikey, lost in his grief and simmering rage, welcomed the isolation. He needed space to nurture the burning ember of his resolve. Days bled into weeks, then months. Mikey went through the motions, attending school, eating meals, and sleeping in the narrow cot assigned to him. But his mind was elsewhere. He was replaying the events of that night over and over, analyzing every detail, searching for some way he could have changed the outcome. He was also formulating a plan. He started small. Push-ups in the morning, sit-ups before bed. He ran laps around the orphanage yard, his lungs burning, his muscles screaming. He devoured books on boxing, martial arts, and self-defense, absorbing every technique, every strategy, every weakness he could exploit. The other orphans noticed the change. They saw the fire in his eyes, the steely determination in his jaw. Some mocked him, calling him Rocky or Rambo. Others, sensing his intensity, kept their distance. But one boy, a skinny kid named Danny with a quick wit and even quicker hands, saw something different. He saw a kindred spirit, someone who understood the pain of loss and the need for revenge. Danny became Mikey's first ally. He knew the streets, the back alleys, and the hidden gyms where underground fighters honed their skills. He also knew people who could help Mikey on his quest. "You got the fire, kid," Danny said one evening, as they sat on the roof of the orphanage, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. "But fire ain't enough. You need someone to teach you how to use it." Danny introduced Mikey to a grizzled old man named Silas, a former boxer who had seen better days. Silas ran a small, dilapidated gym in the roughest part of town. The air inside was thick with the smell of sweat, leather, and liniment. The walls were adorned with faded posters of boxing legends, their faces etched with the scars of countless battles. Silas was a hard man, a man who didn't mince words. He saw the anger in Mikey's eyes, the desperation in his stance. He knew the boy was driven by something more than just a desire to fight. "You want me to teach you how to kill a man?" Silas asked, his voice raspy from years of shouting instructions. Mikey didn't flinch. "I want you to teach me how to win." Silas grunted. "Winning and killing ain't always the same thing, kid. But I can teach you both." The training was brutal. Silas pushed Mikey to his limits, demanding more than he thought he could give. He taught him how to punch, how to move, how to defend himself. He taught him about strategy, about exploiting weaknesses, about using his opponent's momentum against them. Mikey absorbed everything like a sponge. He trained relentlessly, pushing himself past the point of exhaustion. He was driven by a single, unwavering goal: to become strong enough to defeat Calhoun. Years passed. Mikey grew from a skinny, grieving boy into a lean, powerful young man. His muscles were honed, his reflexes lightning fast, his determination unwavering. He excelled at boxing, but Silas also taught him other forms of combat, incorporating elements of martial arts and street fighting into his repertoire. He started fighting in the underground circuit, quickly gaining a reputation for his speed, power, and ruthless efficiency. He was known as the Hurricane, a force of nature that swept through the ring, leaving a trail of battered and broken opponents in its wake. With each victory, Mikey felt himself getting closer to his goal. He was honing his skills, building his reputation, and drawing closer to Calhoun. But he knew that he couldn't just walk up to Calhoun and challenge him. He needed a plan, a way to lure him out of hiding. He needed to make Calhoun come to him. Danny, ever the resourceful street kid, provided the answer. He discovered that Calhoun was planning to participate in a high-stakes underground fighting tournament, held in a secret location somewhere in the Louisiana Bayou. This was Mikey's chance. He would enter the tournament, fight his way to the top, and confront Calhoun in the ring. He would finally get his revenge. He knew it was a dangerous gamble. The tournament was known for its brutality, its lack of rules, and its ruthless competitors. But Mikey didn't care. He was ready to risk everything for the chance to face Calhoun. He told Silas his plan. The old man looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of pride and concern. "You're ready, kid," Silas said. "You're the best fighter I've ever trained. But remember, winning ain't everything. Don't let your anger consume you. Don't let revenge blind you. Stay focused, stay disciplined, and stay alive." Mikey nodded, his jaw set. He was ready. He was ready to face Calhoun. He was ready to face his demons. He was ready to become the undisputed champion. He packed his bag, said goodbye to Danny and Silas, and set off into the Louisiana Bayou, towards the secret location of the underground fighting tournament. He knew that the road ahead would be dangerous, filled with challenges and obstacles, but he was determined to see it through. He owed it to his father. He owed it to himself. He was going to get his revenge. The bayou was a labyrinth of murky waterways, tangled vegetation, and whispering secrets. The air hung thick and heavy, alive with the buzz of insects and the croaking of unseen creatures. Mikey navigated the treacherous landscape with a grim determination, following the vague directions Danny had provided. He felt like he was entering another world, a world where the rules of civilization didn't apply. He finally reached the tournament location, a dilapidated warehouse hidden deep within the swamp. The building was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and guarded by a group of menacing-looking men with tattoos and heavy weaponry. This wasn't just a fight. It was a spectacle, a brutal display of human aggression for the entertainment of the wealthy and depraved. Mikey flashed the crude invitation Danny had procured, a torn piece of paper with a blood-red symbol scrawled on it. The guards eyed him suspiciously, but eventually waved him through. The interior of the warehouse was a chaotic scene of noise and violence. Fighters from all walks of life, hulking brutes, wiry martial artists, and desperate street brawlers, milled about, sizing each other up, psyching themselves up for the battles to come. The air reeked of sweat, blood, and cheap beer. In the center of the warehouse, a makeshift ring had been erected, bathed in the harsh glare of spotlights. The crowd, a motley collection of gamblers, gangsters, and thrill-seekers, roared with anticipation. Mikey felt a surge of adrenaline, a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it. He was one step closer to Calhoun. The tournament was a brutal gauntlet. Each fight was a test of skill, endurance, and sheer willpower. Mikey fought with a controlled fury, channeling his anger into precise, devastating blows. He moved like a hurricane, overwhelming his opponents with his speed and power. He won fight after fight, his reputation as the Hurricane growing with each victory. He faced a mountain of a man named the Brute, a hulking behemoth who relied on brute strength and a relentless assault. Mikey danced around him, dodging his clumsy blows, and eventually took him down with a series of lightning-fast strikes to the pressure points. He battled a skilled martial artist named the Serpent, a master of deception and misdirection. Mikey countered his intricate techniques with raw power and relentless aggression, forcing him to make mistakes and capitalizing on his vulnerabilities. With each victory, Mikey's confidence grew. He was proving to himself and to the world that he was a force to be reckoned with. He was becoming the champion he was destined to be. But the tournament was also taking its toll. He sustained cuts and bruises, his body ached, and his mind was constantly on edge. He knew that he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not for a second. Calhoun could be anywhere, watching, waiting. Between fights, Mikey tried to gather information about Calhoun. He asked around, discreetly inquiring about his whereabouts, his fighting style, his weaknesses, but no one seemed to know anything. It was as if Calhoun had vanished into thin air. The uncertainty gnawed at him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that Calhoun was playing a game with him. Then, during a brief respite between rounds, he saw her. A woman, standing in the shadows, her face partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat. She was beautiful, with piercing blue eyes and a confident, almost defiant, demeanor. There was something familiar about her, something that tugged at his memory. She caught his eye and gave him a subtle nod. Mikey, intrigued, approached her cautiously. "You're looking for Calhoun, aren't you?" she said, her voice soft but firm. Mikey tensed. "Who are you? How do you know?" "My name is Sarah," she said, "and I know Calhoun very well, perhaps better than you think." Mikey hesitated. He didn't trust her. She could be working for Calhoun, trying to lure him into a trap. But he was desperate for information, and she seemed to be his only lead. "What do you know about him?" Mikey asked, his voice low and guarded. Sarah smiled, a knowing, almost sad smile. "I know that he's not the man you think he is, and I know that he's planning something big, something that could change everything." She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. "If you want to find Calhoun, you need to be careful. He's dangerous, and he's not alone." She reached into her pocket and handed Mikey a small, folded piece of paper. "This is where he'll be tomorrow night. Be there, but be prepared. It's going to be a fight." And then, just as quickly as she had appeared, she vanished back into the shadows, leaving Mikey standing alone, clutching the piece of paper in his hand. He unfolded it and read the address. It was a location he recognized. An abandoned oil rig in the middle of the bayou. This was it. His chance to finally confront Calhoun. But he knew that Sarah was right. It was going to be a fight for his life. He looked out at the ring, at the brutal spectacle of violence unfolding before him. He knew that he had to win. He had to survive. He had to become the champion. Not just for himself, but for his father. And for Sarah, the mysterious woman who had given him a glimmer of hope in this dark and dangerous world. He would face Calhoun, and he would make him pay. The final battle was about to begin. The abandoned oil rig loomed against the night sky, a skeletal silhouette of rust and decay. The air was thick with the smell of salt and oil, and the waves crashed against the metal legs of the structure with a rhythmic, almost mournful sound. Mikey approached cautiously, his senses on high alert. He knew he was walking into a trap. He found a way onto the rig, scaling a rickety ladder that groaned under his weight. The platform was deserted, the only light coming from the moon and the distant glow of the mainland. He moved silently, his footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. He reached the main control room, a claustrophobic space filled with outdated equipment and broken machinery. The room was dimly lit by a single flickering bulb, casting long, distorted shadows. And there, standing in the center of the room, was Rex the Rattler Calhoun. He looked older, more weathered than Mikey remembered. His snake tattoos were faded, his face etched with lines of hard living. But his eyes still held that same cruel glint, that same cold indifference that Mikey had seen on the night his father died. "Well, well, well," Calhoun said, his voice raspy. "Look what the cat dragged in. Little Mikey, all grown up." Mikey didn't respond. He just stared at Calhoun, his heart pounding in his chest. The years of pent-up rage, the years of training, the years of planning, all of it culminated in this moment. "You've been a busy boy, Mikey," Calhoun continued, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "Making a name for yourself in the fighting circuit. I've been watching you. I'm impressed." "You killed my father," Mikey said, his voice low and menacing. Calhoun shrugged. "He owed me money. It was business." "He was a good man," Mikey said, his fists clenching. "He didn't deserve to die." "Deserve?" Calhoun laughed. "Deserve has nothing to do with it. This is the real world, kid. The strong survive and the weak get crushed. Tonight, you're going to get crushed," Mikey said, his eyes narrowing. Calhoun chuckled. "You think you can beat me? You're just a kid. I'm a legend." "You're a murderer," Mikey said. "And tonight, you're going to pay for what you did." Calhoun's smile faded. "All right, kid. Let's see what you've got." He lunged at Mikey, his movements lightning fast. Mikey was ready. He dodged the attack and countered with a series of punches, each one landing with precision and power. Calhoun was surprised by Mikey's speed and skill. He had underestimated him. The fight was brutal, a whirlwind of fists and feet. They traded blows, each strike echoing in the confined space. Mikey fought with a controlled fury, channeling his anger into every move. Calhoun fought with a desperate ferocity, knowing that his reputation, his livelihood, and his very life were on the line. The room was filled with the sounds of grunts, curses, and the sickening thud of flesh on flesh. The flickering bulb threatened to go out, plunging them into darkness. Mikey managed to land a solid blow to Calhoun's jaw, sending him staggering backward. Calhoun retaliated with a kick to Mikey's ribs, sending him sprawling to the floor. They both lay there for a moment, gasping for air, their bodies bruised and battered. Then, Calhoun rose to his feet, a crazed look in his eyes. He reached into his boot and pulled out a knife. "This is how it's going to end, kid," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "Just like your old man." Mikey's heart sank. He hadn't expected Calhoun to cheat, but he wasn't surprised. Calhoun was a coward, a bully, a man who would do anything to win. He knew he was in trouble. He was exhausted, injured, and facing a man with a knife. But he refused to give up. He had come too far. He had sacrificed too much. He wouldn't let Calhoun win. He rose to his feet, his eyes fixed on Calhoun. He knew that this was it, the final showdown, the moment of truth. But just as Calhoun lunged at him with the knife, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sarah. She tackled Calhoun from behind, knocking him off balance. The knife went flying, clattering across the metal floor. Calhoun roared with anger and shoved Sarah away. He turned his attention back to Mikey, his eyes burning with rage. "You bitch!" he screamed at Sarah. "You betrayed me." Sarah stood her ground, her eyes filled with defiance. "You deserve everything that's coming to you, Rex." Calhoun ignored her and charged at Mikey. But Mikey was ready. He had seen an opening, a moment of weakness in Calhoun's rage. He stepped aside, dodging Calhoun's attack, and delivered a devastating uppercut to his chin. Calhoun's eyes rolled back in his head, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Mikey stood over him, his chest heaving, his body trembling. He had done it. He had defeated Calhoun. He had avenged his father's death. But as he looked down at Calhoun's lifeless body, he felt a strange emptiness. He had expected to feel satisfaction, relief, even joy, but all he felt was nothing. He had spent years consumed by rage and revenge. He had sacrificed everything to achieve this moment. And now that it was over, he didn't know what to do. Sarah approached him cautiously. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft. Mikey looked at her, his eyes filled with confusion. "I don't know," he said. "I thought I would feel different." Sarah nodded. "Revenge never brings the peace you think it will." She paused, then added, "But it's not over yet, Mikey. There's still a long way to go." Mikey looked at her, puzzled. "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled. "I told you Calhoun was planning something big, something that could change everything. And it's about to happen." She pointed to a series of computer screens in the control room. He was about to activate a failsafe, something to destroy all the evidence of illegal fights and money laundering. Mikey stared at the screens, his mind racing. He realized that he had stumbled into something much bigger than just a personal vendetta. He had uncovered a conspiracy, a network of corruption that reached far beyond the Louisiana bayou. And he was now caught in the middle of it. The computer screens flickered with complex code, displaying a network of offshore accounts, encrypted communications, and incriminating video footage. Mikey, though unfamiliar with the intricacies of cybersecurity, understood the gravity of the situation. This was evidence that could bring down a whole criminal empire. He was going to wipe it all clean, Sarah explained, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Erase every trace of his operation. But I think I can stop it. I just need a little more time." Suddenly, the lights went out. The control room was plunged into darkness, save for the faint glow of the computer screens. "They know we're here," Sarah said, her voice tense. "We have to get out of here." As if on cue, the sound of gunfire erupted from outside the control room. Bullets ripped through the metal walls, sending sparks flying. "Damn it!" Mikey exclaimed. "We're trapped." He grabbed Sarah and pulled her behind a large metal console, using it as a makeshift shield. They were pinned down, surrounded by armed men. "We can't stay here," Mikey said. "They'll breach the door eventually. We need to find another way out." He surveyed the room, searching for an escape route. He spotted a narrow ventilation shaft in the corner of the room. "Think you can fit through that?" he asked Sarah. Sarah nodded. "It's our only chance." Mikey kicked out the grate covering the ventilation shaft. It was a tight squeeze, but Sarah managed to squeeze through. Mikey followed close behind, crawling through the dark, dusty tunnel. The ventilation shaft led them to a different part of the oil rig, a maze of narrow corridors and rusty pipes. They moved quickly and silently, avoiding the armed men who were patrolling the area. "Where are we going?" Mikey asked. "To the helipad," Sarah said. "There's a helicopter there. It's our only way off this rig." They reached the helipad, a small platform perched precariously on the edge of the structure. The helicopter was there, its rotors still, but it was surrounded by armed men. "Damn it," Mikey said. "They're expecting us." He knew they couldn't take on all those men in a direct confrontation. They needed a diversion. "I have an idea," Mikey said, "but it's risky. You have to trust me." He whispered his plan to Sarah. She looked at him, her eyes filled with concern. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "It's our only chance," Mikey said. He took a deep breath and charged out onto the helipad, drawing the attention of the armed men. They opened fire, bullets whizzing past his head. Mikey weaved and dodged, using his agility and speed to avoid the gunfire. He ran towards the edge of the helipad and leaped over the side, plunging into the dark waters below. The armed men rushed to the edge of the helipad, firing into the water. But Mikey was already gone, swimming beneath the surface. He swam as far as he could, then surfaced for air. He knew that the armed men would be searching for him, but he had bought Sarah some time. Sarah, while Mikey created the diversion, used her knowledge of the rig systems to disable the helicopter's security measures. She hotwired the engine and started the rotors. The armed men, realizing what was happening, turned their attention back to the helicopter. But it was too late. Sarah took off, the helicopter rising into the night sky. Mikey watched from the water as the helicopter disappeared into the distance. He knew that Sarah was safe, but he was still stranded on the oil rig, surrounded by armed men. He had to find a way off this rig, and he had to do it fast. He swam back towards the rig, using the darkness as cover. He climbed back onto the platform, avoiding the armed men who were still searching for him. He made his way back to the control room, hoping to find some way to contact the authorities. But the room was empty. The armed men were gone. He sat down at the computer console, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He managed to restore power to the room and access the rig's communication system. He sent out a distress signal, alerting the Coast Guard to their situation. He knew it would take them some time to reach the rig, but it was his only hope. As he waited for rescue, he couldn't help but wonder about Sarah. Who was she? Why had she helped him? And what was she going to do with the information she had stolen from Calhoun? He knew that she was in danger, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to protect her. He had to find her. But first, he had to survive the night. He was still trapped on the oil rig, surrounded by enemies. And he knew that they wouldn't give up until they had found him. The hunt was on. The waiting was agonizing. Every creak of the metal structure, every splash in the water below, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Mikey's veins. He knew they were coming for him. He just didn't know when or from where. He used the time to plan, to analyze the layout of the rig, to identify potential escape routes and ambush points. He was a predator now, using his knowledge of the environment to his advantage. He turned off as many lights as possible, shrouding the rig in darkness, making it harder for his pursuers to see him. He moved silently, like a ghost, his senses honed to a razor's edge. He found a stash of tools in a nearby storage room: wrenches, pipes, crowbars. He fashioned them into makeshift weapons, ready to defend himself. He was outnumbered and outgunned, but he wasn't going to go down without a fight. The first attack came just before dawn. A group of armed men, their faces obscured by masks, stormed the control room. Mikey was ready for them. He ambushed them from behind a stack of crates, using a wrench to knock one of them unconscious. He then used the man's own weapon against the others, firing a volley of bullets that sent them scrambling for cover. A fierce firefight erupted, the sound of gunfire echoing across the rig. Mikey moved quickly, using the environment to his advantage, picking off his attackers one by one. He was a whirlwind of motion, a force of nature, impossible to contain. But the odds were stacked against him. More and more armed men poured into the control room, overwhelming him with their numbers. He was forced to retreat, falling back deeper into the maze of corridors. He found himself trapped in a narrow passageway, with armed men closing in from both ends. He was surrounded with nowhere to run. Just when he thought all hope was lost, a voice echoed through the passageway. "Hold your fire." The armed men hesitated, their weapons lowered. A figure emerged from the shadows. It was Sarah. She stood there, her arms outstretched, her face calm and composed. "Let him go," she said, her voice firm. "This doesn't have to end like this." The armed men looked at each other, confused. They didn't know what to do. "What are you doing, Sarah?" one of them asked. "You're betraying us." "I'm doing what's right," Sarah said. "This whole operation is corrupt. It's hurting people. It has to stop." "You're a fool," the man said. "You don't know what you're up against." "I know exactly what I'm up against," Sarah said. "And I'm not afraid." She turned to Mikey. "Go," she said. "Get out of here. I'll handle them." Mikey hesitated. He didn't want to leave her. He knew she was putting herself in danger. "Go," she repeated, her voice urgent. I can't protect you if you stay here. Mikey nodded. He knew she was right. He had to trust her. He turned and ran, disappearing back into the maze of corridors. Sarah faced the armed men, her eyes filled with defiance. You can either let me walk away, she said, or you can try to stop me. But if you do, you'll have to kill me. And I don't think you're willing to do that. The armed men hesitated. They knew that Sarah was valuable. She knew too much. They couldn't afford to kill her. Fine, the man said. Go. But if you ever come back, we'll kill you without hesitation. Sarah smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. She turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Mikey watched from a distance as Sarah left the rig. He knew that she was taking a huge risk, but he trusted her. He knew that she would do whatever it took to expose the truth. He waited for the Coast Guard to arrive, his heart filled with gratitude and admiration for Sarah. He didn't know her very well, but he knew that she was a special person, a person who was willing to fight for what she believed in, even if it meant putting her own life on the line. When the Coast Guard finally arrived, they secured the rig and arrested the remaining armed men. Mikey was taken into custody and questioned about the events that had transpired. He told them everything he knew, holding nothing back. He learned that Sarah was a former FBI agent who had been working undercover, trying to infiltrate Calhoun's organization. She had been gathering evidence for months, hoping to bring down the entire operation. But Calhoun had discovered her true identity, and she had been forced to blow her cover. She had helped Mikey because she knew that he was the only one who could expose Calhoun and his cronies. Mikey was released from custody and given a new identity. He was offered a chance to start over, to leave his past behind. But he couldn't. He couldn't forget about Sarah. He couldn't forget about his father. He couldn't forget about the injustice that had been done. He knew that he had to find Sarah. He had to help her bring down the criminal empire that had taken everything from him. He had to become the undisputed champion, not just in the ring but in life. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He would be facing powerful enemies, dangerous situations, and impossible odds. But he was ready. He was stronger now. He was more determined than ever. He set off on a new journey, a journey that would take him to the darkest corners of the American underworld. He was going to find Sarah, and he was going to make them pay. Mikey vanished. He shed the new identity the government had given him like a snake shedding its skin. He couldn't be tied down by a false name and a fabricated past. He needed to be free, untraceable, a ghost in the machine. He returned to New Orleans, the city where his nightmare had begun. He haunted the back alleys, the dive bars, the places where secrets were traded like currency. He used his fighting skills to earn a living, taking on any challenge, any opponent just to stay sharp, to stay alive. But his real purpose was finding Sarah. He knew she was out there, somewhere, battling against a force much larger than herself. He had to find her before it was too late. He started by tracking down Danny, his old friend from the orphanage. Danny, now a streetwise hustler with connections to the city's underworld, was hesitant to help at first. Mikey's disappearance had worried him, and he didn't want to get involved in any more trouble. Look, Mikey, Danny said, his voice low and guarded. What you're doing is crazy. These people are dangerous. They'll kill you without a second thought. I know the risks, Mikey said, his eyes filled with determination. But I have to do this. Sarah's in trouble, and I can't just stand by and do nothing. Danny sighed. He knew that Mikey was stubborn, that he wouldn't back down once he had made up his mind. All right, Danny said. I'll help you, but you have to promise me that you'll be careful, and that you'll get out of this alive. Danny used his connections to gather information about Sarah's whereabouts. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sarah had gone deep underground, erasing her tracks, making it impossible to trace her movements. But Danny was persistent. He spent weeks scouring the city, talking to informants, following leads, piecing together fragments of information. Finally, he found a breakthrough. I heard something, Danny said, his voice excited. Someone mentioned seeing a woman who fits Sarah's description in Atlanta. She was asking questions about Calhoun's associates. Atlanta. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead Mikey had. He thanked Danny for his help and set off for Atlanta, his heart filled with hope. He arrived in Atlanta and began his search. He visited the bars, the clubs, the places where Calhoun's associates were known to frequent. He asked around, showing Sarah's picture to anyone who would look at it. Days turned into weeks, and Mikey's hope began to fade. He was starting to think that Danny's information had been wrong, that Sarah was long gone. Then, one night, he walked into a smoky jazz club and saw her. She was sitting at a table in the corner, talking to a man in a dark suit. Mikey's heart leaped. He had found her. He approached her cautiously, his senses on high alert. He didn't know who the man she was talking to was, or whether he was friend or foe. "Sarah?" Mikey said, his voice low. Sarah looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. She quickly glanced at the man she was talking to, then back at Mikey. "Mikey," she said, her voice strained. "What are you doing here?" "I came to help you," Mikey said. "I know you're in trouble." The man in the dark suit stood up, his eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" he asked Sarah. "He's a friend," Sarah said. "Someone I used to know." The man didn't look convinced. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun. "I don't like strangers," he said. "Especially strangers who come barging in on my conversations." Mikey knew that he was in danger. He had to act fast. He grabbed Sarah and pulled her behind him, using his body as a shield. The man fired his gun. The bullet whizzed past Mikey's head, narrowly missing him. Mikey retaliated, delivering a swift kick to the man's chest, sending him sprawling backward. He then disarmed the man and pointed the gun at his head. "Who are you?" Mikey demanded. "And what do you want with Sarah?" The man hesitated, then spoke. "I'm with the FBI. I'm helping Agent Walker." Sarah confirmed. "He's telling the truth, Mikey. He's on our side." Mikey lowered the gun, but remained cautious. He knew that he couldn't trust anyone completely. Sarah explained that she and the FBI were closing in on Calhoun's remaining associates. They were planning a major operation to take them down, but they needed more evidence. "We need your help, Mikey," Sarah said. "You know these people. You know how they operate. You can help us bring them to justice." Mikey hesitated. He had always been a loner, a fighter who relied on his own strength and skills. He had never trusted the authorities. But he knew that Sarah was right. He couldn't do this alone. He needed help. And Sarah and the FBI were his best chance of bringing down Calhoun's criminal empire. He agreed to help, but on his own terms. He would work with them, but he would remain independent, following his own instincts, making his own decisions. Sarah agreed. She knew that Mikey was a force to be reckoned with, and that he would be a valuable asset to their team. Together, they formed an unlikely alliance, a group of individuals from different backgrounds, with different motives, united by a common goal: to bring down the bad guys and make the world a better place. The final battle was about to begin. The alliance between Mikey, Sarah, and the FBI was uneasy, a marriage of convenience born out of necessity. Agent Walker, Sarah's FBI contact, was a seasoned professional, used to operating within the rigid structure of the Bureau. He respected Sarah's instincts, but he was wary of Mikey, seeing him as a loose cannon, a liability. Mikey, in turn, distrusted the FBI. He had seen firsthand how the system could fail, how justice could be corrupted. He trusted Sarah, but he wasn't sure about Walker. Despite their differences, they had a common goal: to dismantle Calhoun's criminal network and bring his associates to justice. They worked together, pooling their resources, sharing information, planning their next move. Sarah and Mikey spent hours poring over documents, analyzing financial records, and studying surveillance footage. They identified key players in Calhoun's organization, tracking their movements, uncovering their secrets. Mikey's knowledge of the underworld proved invaluable. He knew the language, the customs, the hidden codes that the FBI couldn't decipher. He could identify the informants, the hitmen, the money launderers that the FBI had overlooked. He also helped them prepare for the inevitable confrontation. He trained them in hand-to-hand combat, teaching them how to defend themselves, how to anticipate their opponent's moves. He turned them into a fighting force, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As they worked together, Mikey and Sarah's bond deepened. They shared their stories, their fears, their hopes. They learned about each other's past, their motivations, their dreams. Sarah told Mikey about her childhood, about growing up in a small town, about her desire to make a difference in the world. She told him about her years in the FBI, about the cases she had worked on, about the sacrifices she had made. Mikey told Sarah about his father, about the night he had died, about the rage and grief that had consumed him for so long. He told her about his training with Silas, about his fights in the underground circuit, about his quest for revenge. They found solace in each other's company, a shared understanding of loss and pain. They were both broken people, scarred by their past, but they were also strong, resilient, and determined to overcome their challenges. As they grew closer, Mikey began to see Sarah in a new light. He saw her strength, her courage, her compassion. He realized that she was more than just a colleague, more than just a friend. He was falling in love with her. He tried to suppress his feelings, knowing that a relationship would only complicate things, that it would put them both in danger. But he couldn't help himself. He was drawn to her like a moth to a flame. Sarah, too, was drawn to Mikey. She admired his strength, his determination, his unwavering loyalty. She saw the pain in his eyes, the vulnerability beneath his tough exterior. She wanted to heal him, to protect him, to love him. But she knew that a relationship was impossible. She was an FBI agent, sworn to uphold the law. He was a former fighter, a vigilante, a man who had broken the law to achieve his goals. They were from different worlds with different values. Despite their reservations, they couldn't deny their feelings for each other. They shared stolen glances, lingering touches, whispered words. They were falling in love, despite the danger, despite the impossibility of it all. The operation was reaching its climax. They had gathered enough evidence to take down Calhoun's entire network. They had identified the location of their main headquarters, a secluded compound in the Georgia countryside. They planned a raid on the compound, a coordinated attack that would involve dozens of FBI agents. They knew it would be a dangerous operation, that they would be facing heavily armed opponents. But they were ready. They had trained for this moment. As they prepared for the raid, Mikey and Sarah shared a quiet moment alone. They stood in a dimly lit room, their eyes locked together. "I'm scared," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," Mikey said. "Me too." He reached out and took her hand, his fingers interlacing with hers. "We'll get through this," he said. "We'll do it together." He leaned in and kissed her, a soft, tender kiss that spoke volumes. It was a kiss of hope, a kiss of love, a kiss of farewell. They knew that this could be the end, that they might not survive the raid. But they were willing to risk everything for each other, for the cause, for the chance to make the world a better place. The raid was about to begin. The raid on Calhoun's compound was a symphony of controlled chaos. Black SUVs roared through the gates, scattering gravel and snapping floodlights. FBI agents, clad in tactical gear, swarmed the grounds, shouting commands and securing the perimeter. The air crackled with tension, punctuated by the sharp reports of gunfire. Mikey and Sarah moved as a unit, a well-oiled machine. They cleared buildings, disarmed guards, and navigated the labyrinthine corridors with ruthless efficiency. Mikey's fighting skills were on full display, a blur of fists and feet that left opponents incapacitated in his wake. Sarah's tactical expertise kept them one step ahead, anticipating enemy movements and exploiting weaknesses in their defenses. They fought their way to the main house, the heart of the compound. Inside, Calhoun's remaining lieutenants were holed up, preparing for a final stand. The resistance was fierce, a barrage of gunfire and explosions that threatened to overwhelm the FBI forces. Agent Walker coordinated the attack, directing his team with precision and authority. He was a seasoned veteran, unflappable under pressure, a true leader, or so it seemed. Mikey and Sarah breached the main house, engaging in a brutal close-quarters battle. They fought their way through the living room, the dining room, the library, each room a scene of carnage and destruction. Finally, they reached Calhoun's office, the nerve center of his operation. The door was reinforced, barricaded from the inside. "Breach it!" Walker yelled over the comms. Mikey stepped forward, ready to use his strength to force the door open. But Sarah stopped him. "Wait," she said, her voice urgent. "Something's not right." She examined the door, running her fingers along the frame, her eyes scanning the hinges. "This door is rigged," she said. "It's booby-trapped. If we try to force it open, it'll explode." Walker scoffed. "Don't be ridiculous, Walker. Just breach the damn door." But Sarah stood her ground. "I'm telling you it's rigged. I can feel it. We need to find another way in." Mikey trusted Sarah's instincts. He knew that she was right. "There's a window on the other side of the room," Mikey said. "We can try to get in that way." They moved quickly, circling around the house, avoiding the booby-trap door. They reached the window and peered inside. And that's when they saw it. Calhoun wasn't in the office. Walker was. He was standing at a large desk, surrounded by stacks of cash and incriminating documents. He was stuffing the money into a duffel bag, preparing to escape. "Walker," Sarah said, her voice filled with disbelief. "What are you doing?" Walker looked up, his eyes widening in surprise. He hadn't expected them to find him. "It's not what it looks like," he said, his voice strained. "Then what is it, Walker?" Sarah demanded. "Why are you stealing Calhoun's money?" Walker hesitated, then sighed. "All right, you got me," he said. "I've been working for Calhoun for years. I was feeding him information, protecting his operation, helping him evade the law." Mikey and Sarah were stunned. They couldn't believe that Walker, the man they had trusted, the man they had relied on, had been a traitor all along. "Why, Walker?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with pain. "Why would you do this?" "Money," Walker said. "Power. Calhoun offered me a lot of both. I couldn't resist." He raised his gun, pointing it at Sarah. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, "but you know too much. I can't let you leave here alive." Mikey reacted instantly, throwing himself in front of Sarah, shielding her from the gunfire. Walker fired, the bullet hitting Mikey in the chest. He staggered backward, his hand clutching his wound. Sarah screamed, her eyes filled with terror. Walker turned his attention to Sarah, ready to finish her off. But before he could fire, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Calhoun. He stepped into the room, his eyes burning with rage. "You betrayed me, Walker," Calhoun said, his voice dripping with venom. "You were supposed to protect me. You were supposed to help me escape." "I was going to, Calhoun," Walker said, his voice pleading. "I just needed to get the money first." Calhoun shook his head. "You're a fool, Walker. You thought you could outsmart me. You thought you could get away with this." He raised his gun and fired, the bullet hitting Walker in the head. Walker crumpled to the floor, dead. Calhoun turned his attention to Mikey and Sarah. He smiled, a cruel, sadistic smile. "Well, well, well," he said. "Look who's here. The little fighter and the FBI agent. I've been expecting you." He raised his gun, ready to finish what he had started. But before he could fire, Mikey lunged at him. Despite his wound, Mikey fought with a ferocity that Calhoun couldn't match. He disarmed Calhoun and pinned him to the ground. "It's over, Calhoun," Mikey said, his voice filled with rage. "You're going to pay for what you did." But Calhoun just laughed. "You think you've won, Mikey?" he said. "You think you've defeated me? You're wrong. This is just the beginning." He looked at Sarah, his eyes filled with malice. "You may have taken down my organization," he said, "but you'll never find what you're really looking for." Sarah frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Calhoun smiled. "Your father, Sarah. He's not dead. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. "What?" she said. "That's impossible. My father died years ago." Calhoun shook his head. "He's alive, Sarah. And he's been working with me all along." Sarah stared at Calhoun, her mind reeling. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her father, the man she had idolized, the man she thought was dead, was alive, and he was a criminal. Calhoun laughed. "That's right, Sarah," he said. "Your father is my partner. And he's waiting for you. He's waiting to welcome you into the family." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father, the man she believed had died a hero, was alive and a criminal. The foundation of her entire life crumbled beneath her feet. She staggered back, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. Mikey, despite his wound, sensed her turmoil. He tightened his grip on Calhoun, preventing him from capitalizing on Sarah's shock. He knew he had to protect her, even from the truth. "He's lying, Sarah," Mikey said, his voice strained. "He's just trying to mess with your head." But Sarah knew deep down that Calhoun was telling the truth. The look in his eyes, the certainty in his voice, told her everything she needed to know. "Where is he?" Sarah demanded, her voice trembling. "Where's my father?" Calhoun smiled, a cruel, knowing smile. "He's waiting for you, Sarah. He's waiting to welcome you home." Before Sarah could react, Calhoun reached into his pocket and pulled out a small detonator. He pressed the button, and the entire compound erupted in flames. The house shook violently, debris falling from the ceiling. The FBI agents outside scrambled for cover as the building threatened to collapse. "We have to get out of here," Mikey yelled, dragging Sarah towards the nearest exit. They fought their way through the burning house, dodging falling debris and leaping over flames. They reached the front door just as the roof caved in, narrowly escaping with their lives. They stood outside, watching as the compound burned to the ground, taking Calhoun and his secrets with it. The fire raged, consuming everything in its path, a symbol of the destruction that had been wrought. Sarah was numb, her mind reeling. She couldn't process everything that had just happened. Her father was alive, a criminal, and now, possibly lost in that inferno. Mikey held her close, offering her what little comfort he could. He knew that she was hurting, that she was facing a pain that no one should have to endure. "We'll find him, Sarah," Mikey said, his voice soft. "We'll find your father, and we'll get to the bottom of this." But Sarah shook her head. "It's over, Mikey," she said. "There's nothing left to find. My father is gone. Everything I believed in is gone." She pulled away from Mikey and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Mikey watched her go, his heart aching. He knew that he couldn't let her go, that he had to help her find the truth, even if it meant facing the most dangerous enemy of all, her own father. He tracked Sarah to her childhood home, a small, unassuming house in a quiet town in the Midwest. He found her sitting on the porch, staring out at the empty street, lost in her thoughts. He sat down beside her, offering her a silent presence. "He was a good man, Mikey," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "He was a hero. He saved lives. He dedicated his life to serving his country." "I know," Mikey said, "but people change, Sarah. Sometimes, for the worse." "I don't understand," Sarah said. "Why would he do this? Why would he become a criminal?" "I don't know," Mikey said, "but we'll find out. We'll find out the truth, no matter what it takes." They spent days searching for clues, poring over old photographs, reading old letters, talking to old friends and neighbors. They slowly pieced together the story of Sarah's father, a story of a man who had been betrayed, who had been wronged, who had turned to the dark side in search of revenge. They discovered that Sarah's father had been a CIA agent, working undercover to expose a corrupt politician. But he had been betrayed by his own agency, framed for a crime he didn't commit, and left to rot in a foreign prison. He had spent years in prison, enduring torture and abuse. He had emerged a changed man, hardened, bitter, and consumed by a desire for revenge. He had joined forces with Calhoun, using his skills and knowledge to build a criminal empire, all in an effort to get back at the people who had wronged him. Sarah was heartbroken, devastated by the truth, but she also understood. She understood the pain, the anger, the desire for revenge. She knew that she had to stop her father, not just for the sake of justice, but for his own sake. They tracked him to a remote island in the Caribbean, where he was living in luxury, surrounded by armed guards. They infiltrated the island, using their skills and expertise to evade the guards and reach Sarah's father. They found him sitting on a balcony, overlooking the ocean, a glass of wine in his hand. He looked older, more weathered, but his eyes still held that same spark of intelligence and determination. "Sarah," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of surprise and sadness. "What are you doing here?" "I came to stop you, Dad," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I can't let you continue down this path. It's too late." "Sarah," her father said, "I've gone too far. There's no turning back now." "There's always a choice, Dad," Sarah said. "You can still do the right thing." Her father shook his head. "The only right thing is revenge, Sarah. To make them pay for what they did to me." He raised his hand, signaling his guards to attack. But Sarah was ready. She fought with a ferocity that surprised her father, disarming the guards and protecting Mikey from harm. She faced her father, her eyes filled with tears. "Please, Dad," she said, "don't do this. Let it go. Let go of the anger, the hate, the revenge. It's destroying you." Her father hesitated, his eyes filled with conflict. He looked at Sarah, at the daughter he had abandoned, at the woman she had become, and then he lowered his gun. "You're right, Sarah," he said, his voice barely audible. "It's time to let it go." He surrendered, turning himself in to the authorities. He was brought to justice, but he also found peace. He finally let go of the anger and hate that had consumed him for so long. Sarah and Mikey stood on the beach, watching as the sun set over the ocean. They had faced their demons, they had overcome their challenges, and they had found each other. Mikey, who had watched his father get punched to death, had finally found peace, not through revenge, but through love and forgiveness. He was no longer driven by rage, but by compassion. He had become the undisputed champion of his own life. Sarah had found her father, and she had helped him find redemption. She had learned that even the most broken people can be healed, that even the darkest past can be overcome. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with love and hope. They knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but they were ready to face it together. They were champions, not just in the ring but in life. They were the undisputed champions of their own destinies.